It's important for you to distinguish between brightness and contrast. I want you to pause the video and try to explain each of those two terms in a couple of sentences. Write them down, take a few minutes, write them down and check them at the end of this session. Write them down and then resume. So we're going to open up image J. We're going to open Lena, for want of a better image. Lena, or look for Lena 256. Lena 256, and we'll actually scale her up. So you know some of these commands already. We're going to scale her up by a factor 2. Bilinear interpolation. Okay, so we've got a bigger Lena here, and then I want to make 2 duplicates of that. So you follow me and do the same. Make a duplicate. Okay, and make another duplicate. All right. We're going to leave the original Lena as is. We're going to look at this duplicate here, go into Image, Adjust, Brightness and Contrast, and this box comes up. It shows the histogram of pixel values. Talked about that earlier, that run from here to here. And it shows the lookup table, which is the default lookup table, looking up the pixel values and getting gray values. So we know about that. I want to skip minimum and maximum and go to brightness. Look at this image as we change the brightness control. The image gets brighter. We pull it down the other end, it gets darker. It gets brighter, it gets darker. This is brightness. How are we doing that? How are we changing the brightness? In practice, we're changing the lookup table. You can see that it's shifting. We reset back to what we began with, the default lookup table. As we pull the brightness slider to the right, the lookup table moves up, stays parallel to the original default, but moves up, so that each pixel value is looked up to a higher value, a higher gray value, and vice versa. When we want to darken the image, we pull the lookup table down. So that's brightness. It's like we're adding numbers to all the pixel values, all of the pixel values in the image, or taking values away, the further that we go down in brightness. But we're not actually doing this adding and subtracting. Instead, we're changing the lookup table. So I want to reset that, and that tells us about brightness. If we look at the other image here, the other duplicate, I want to look at contrast now and pull the slider bar for contrast. She gets more contrasty. She gets less contrasty. We reset it. So this is different from brightness. How would you explain the difference? Sliding the contrast control instead of the brightness control. So that's what we have to figure out. That's contrast, that's high contrast, that's low contrast. And if you look up here, we can see that we're doing this by changing the lookup table also. We're changing the lookup table from the default, not keeping it parallel to the default, but actually changing the slope. To make a high contrast image, we're increasing the slope of the lookup table. It's 0 here, then it increases, and then the gradient goes to 0 again. Okay, and if we reduce the contrast, notice the effect on the image. We're reducing the slope of the lookup table. We reset it back. We change the contrast by increasing the slope. We increase the contrast, we reduce the contrast. We can increase the contrast right up to the maximum, where the slope changes, gets bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger slope until it becomes infinite. And we have a step function here and a binary or black and white image here, the maximum contrast that we can get. Or we reduce the contrast, the slope is getting lower and lower until the slope becomes 0 and every pixel value looks up as mid-gray on this scale here, and the image gets lost, the contrast goes to 0. And the question is, if we want to increase the contrast of this image, how far should we go? Should pull it up, should we stop here, or should we go further, or should we go further still? If we go too far, we lose a bit of information because all the pixel values here are ending up as black and all of these pixel values are ending up as white, when we should be able to tell the difference between these pixel values and these ones up here. So where's the happy medium where we improve the contrast, increase the contrast a little, but not too much? Think about it. How far should we go in that? We can apply that, and kick that in, but let's not do that. Let's reset back and keep asking ourselves, where should we stop? Where should we stop increasing the contrast, getting as much contrast as we can without losing information in the image? And you may realize we should start our lookup table there. It doesn't matter that all these pixels go to 0 because there are no pixels in the image down here and there are no pixels up here. So we want to run a lookup table that goes from black to white. Black for the minimum pixel value in the histogram and white from the maximum value. That will be our optimum stretch of contrast. This is a linear stretch. We're keeping a linear lookup table, but we're stretching things out. We go back to that. We say this is the default. We can go to auto and it'll automatically give us the optimum linear stretch, linear contrast stretch. And we can apply that, and if we do apply it, we see that the lookup table gets pulled out to span the full range, 0 to 255. We can save this image here, save this image into our folder. All right, we'll call it 263 and save it, and then close it, and then bring it back. Open, it was Lena 263. 263. You can see from the thumbnail that it's better contrast. We open it up. We'll go to plugins, live histogram, and we'll look at the histogram. It has been stretched, but there are some missing values there because we've stretched it out from the initial running from 30 to 235. We've stretched it out by using a higher gradient lookup table. We've stretched it out to run from 0 to 255. But there are still only 205 different pixel values that are now in this image here. Plugins, chapter 5 plugins, spanning the range from 0 to 255. So there are a few missing values, about 50 or so missing values, right? And this is what we're getting now. We're getting increased contrast over this one. And I want you to try a few things. Try that on a few different images. Let me go back just to say a few words before I finish on brightness. We saw brightness. If we look at this image, adjust brightness. We change the brightness by pulling this, but how bright or how dark should we take it to? In fact, should we change the brightness of that original image at all? And the answer is that the average pixel value should be about 127, 128. Let's see what it is in this here. Plugins, chapter 5, live histogram. The average was 124.7. So we could change the brightness a little bit. Oops. I have to click on the image itself to see the brightness. So the brightness could be increased a little bit, except the live histogram is not following that. We want to get the mean from 124.7 up to 127 or 128. It's hardly worth the difficulty, but if you had an image that was very dark, you'd want to take its mean up to 127, 128 with this before you start adjusting the contrast. Try experimenting with a few images, but remember, brightness and contrast are very, very different. I want you to write down and try and explain the two terms now after having looked at this video.